So we should let it go.
When violent protests happen, law enforcement has a responsibility to handle it, but would you describe an entire city as war-ravaged when there are protests, even if they're violent, that's happening outside of a single building?
Yes, I would say if there are violent protests happening against a federal facility, they are being ravaged. I completely agree with that language.
Okay.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to look at Abby Phillip absolutely holding her ground against Scott Jennings and his usual MAGA talking points. Scott basically went off about Portland being anarchy, talking about ICE raids and so-called law and order. But trust me, the way Abby handles it and the direction this conversation takes will make you want to stick around till the very end. And hey, before we jump in, comment down below where you're watching this from. I'm really curious to see how far this community is reaching. And if you don't mind, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're just getting started, and every bit of support means a lot. All right, now let's get into the video.
President Trump told the military that he wants American cities to be their training grounds. And it seems like, Alencia, they're getting ready to carry out that promise. Just to reiterate what you heard Caroline Levitt say, she described Portland as war-ravaged.
Yeah, you know, it's really frustrating and disgusting to hear the president and those coming out of this administration talking about U.S. cities this way. I remember in 2024, I was senior advisor to Vice President Harris's campaign when folks thought that she was lying when she said that Donald Trump is going to send the military on the American people. And that's exactly what he's doing. And what she did also say is, talking about left-wing domestic terrorists. It's a problem when people dissent, right, to this administration. It's a problem when they do. But I know we're going to talk about this when a conservative influencer is all of a sudden arrested. It's a huge issue, and that all of a sudden the police are corrupt. And yet there's no conversation about the police's overreach or the military's overreach in these communities when folks who disagree with this administration bring these claims as well.
Yeah, I mean, how does that work, Scott? I mean, all of a sudden, you know, obviously journalists shouldn't be arrested, but this is not the first time, even in the last few months, that journalists have been arrested at protests. And it seems that in this particular instance, he was in a physical altercation with protesters. And so everybody was arrested. So now all of a sudden that's a predicate for bringing the military into Portland?
Well, no, the predicate is that Portland has been occupied by Antifa for quite some time. You guys keep calling them protests. These aren't protests. These are violent people. They're attacking law enforcement. They're attacking federal facilities. The President of the United States has every obligation to defend federal facilities and federal personnel there. I agree with you. It is a disgrace. It's a disgrace that we have an American city that is essentially being occupied by left-wing radicals, and the locals won't do anything about it. And so now the president...
Exaggeration of what's
it
happening
is not
in
an
Portland.
exaggeration.
I mean,
I see the video.
By local officials has been described as something that's essentially happening in one city block of Portland.
They are assaulting the ICE facilities. They are assaulting the ICE agents.
It's a city, and it's not a perfect city, but it is a city. And something occurring in one city block is suddenly Portland is war-ravaged.
Do you dispute that they've attacked the ICE facility?
I didn't say anything about that. I said that it's happening in one block of the city.
Is that,
so
how many blocks is it?
Does that constitute Portland being a war-ravaged city?
I think what's happened in Portland is a disgrace. Nobody wants to go there. And yes, parts of the city are ravaged by these protesters, and federal officials
the city as being
believe their facilities are under attack.
Even when there are violent protests, which, by the way, nothing new about violent protests, as you know.
So it's not new, so we should let it go.
When violent protests happen, law enforcement has a responsibility to handle it, but would you describe an entire city as war-ravaged when there are protests, even if they're violent, that's happening outside of a single building?
Yes, I would say if there are violent protests happening against a federal facility, they are being ravaged. I completely agree with that language.
Okay, all right.
Portland.
Okay, let's just pause right there, because that ending was insane. Scott Jennings literally calling Portland war-ravaged. Like, seriously? War-ravaged? That's what we're calling one city block now? In my opinion, that's not just an exaggeration, that's propaganda talk. Words like that are used to justify military crackdowns. You call something a war zone long enough, and suddenly it's okay to send troops into your own cities. Think about it. If a couple of blocks in DC or New York had protests, would we call the whole city war-ravaged? No. We'd call it unrest. We'd call it demonstrations. But when it's Portland, a city with a strong progressive movement, suddenly it's war? You see what's happening here, right? It's about framing. They want to paint left-wing dissent as violent chaos so that heavy policing feels justified. And what really gets me is how casually he says it, like it's normal to describe American cities this way. In my opinion, when you normalize that language, you normalize military occupation. That's how we end up accepting things like ICE raids, chemical agents on civilians, and helicopters over neighborhoods. If you start calling protests wars, you're not just changing words. You're changing what kind of country you're okay living in. So yeah, call it what it is, an exaggeration designed to scare people. Portland isn't war-ravaged. It's a city where people are fed up. And the fact that some folks can't tell the difference between protest and war says a lot about who they're listening to. Anyway, what do you think about that take? Is this language intentional fear-mongering, or do you think they actually believe it? Let me know down below.
Portland isn't a war-ravaged city. I think political spin is a part of ginnying up everything that you need to do to execute whatever agenda that you have. I mean, the president said that he feels like American cities can be training grounds for the military. Anyone who halfway cares about the freedom of the average America, that should have a chilling effect on you, that a president would say that. It's so far beyond the pale of what we would have accepted in past decades and times of a norm for a commander-in-chief. It's absurd. It's interesting here that everybody was arrested and they're honing in on this one guy. The underlying, I guess, lesson that I get from that is kind of the lesson I get from MAGA, is that they get to choose which Americans matter insofar as who we should care about gets arrested, who we should care about is treated fairly. And when one of their own gets treated that way, then we have to send in the military. All of this stuff is a part and parcel of what we've been seeing going on. And if we don't have the courage and the actual gumption to stand up to it, it's just going to get worse.
Well, I would kind of push back on the idea that Donald Trump is, acting unprecedented. I remember when Tim Walz sent the National Guard in down the streets in Minnesota telling people to stay inside their houses. I mean, that was militarization. But to the point of who is getting targeted here, look, Katie Davis Court is an independent reporter. She was attacked this week in Portland. She has a huge black eye. Her attacker was not arrested, right? Nick Sorter, according to the video footage that is online, it appears that he was being harassed and targeted by these violent agitators, and they were not held accountable at all for threatening him, for seemingly agitating the situation to a degree, and yet he was. And the Portland police have not come out yet with any kind of information to give us any indication why they made that arrest.
Are you, I want to make sure I'm not confusing incidents, but you're suggesting that the people that he was in an altercation with were not arrested. They were arrested. They were all arrested according to the Portland PD.
Right,
and in fact, there were arrests that were made by federal agencies in the same scuffle. Federal police officers made arrests of protesters and anti-protesters who were in altercations. So the idea that this is Portland PD just being, targeting pro-MAGA voices is just not true.
Right, but the larger point of this, and to Scott's earlier point, this has been going on, especially this past week. We have seen violent agitators there, and they have not arrested other violent agitators who have thrown things at federal law enforcement, who have attacked a federal building. So when they do go after Nick Sorter, it makes you wonder.
I guess the thing is,
but it makes you wonder, what have they been doing all week with these violent agitators?
I'm trying to understand what you're saying, is because it's not true that they have not been arrested. There have been arrests. There have been many arrests over the last few days. The press releases have been sent out by both the federal officials and by local officials. There have been arrests. But I mean, is the concern about, police aggression against journalists? Because there was a journalist just in the last week who had ICE officials shooting, non-live ammunition at their vehicle when they were in a clearly marked press vehicle. That also happened. I heard nothing about that. I mean, there were journalists arrested in Los Angeles during those protests. Nothing about that.
I mean, why?
Well, I think what
she's brain dead.
Dan is trying to say, and to pull apart some of what you're saying, is that it becomes an issue for the right when it is someone that leans towards their ideology, versus having the conversation where you have pointed out, several people have been arrested. But in this whole conversation about ICE and people protesting, I'm stepping back and thinking about why people are protesting at these ICE facilities, because they are frustrated with what is happening in communities and the inhumane actions that this administration is taking on migrant people. And so what all of this conversation and all of that's happening in Portland and even in other cities, it's showing the American people that dissent is not really welcome here when you disagree with inhumane practices that this
throwing
Do you
things
government
believe there's a
federal law
difference between
enforcement.
dissent and protest or violence?
I do, but
Okay,
what
so-
I'm
and do you agree
saying
there's
is-
been violence in Portland?
Can I ask you guys
All right, Scott, come on, man. What kind of question is this? Of course there's a difference. Everyone knows that. Nobody watching this is sitting here confused like, wait, are protests and violence the same thing? No. In my opinion, that kind of question is what people throw out when they've already lost the point but still want to sound reasonable. It's a way to derail the conversation, to move away from what's actually being said, which is that dissent in America is being punished. People are being arrested. Journalists are being targeted, and communities are being raided. Not because they're violent, but because they're vocal. And that's really what this whole debate is about. Not whether people can tell the difference between protest and violence, but whether those in power are willing to admit that some of these so-called crackdowns are way over the top. Because, yeah, sure, there have been moments where protests get tense. Nobody's denying that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how quickly the government reaches for force instead of actually listening. In my opinion, it's just easier for people like Scott to pretend the issue is violent agitators instead of asking the harder question. Why are people protesting in the first place? Why are they outside ICE facilities? Why are they marching in the streets? It's because people are frustrated. They're seeing things that feel unfair, and they want to be heard. And when you reduce all that to just violence, you erase the entire message. You make it sound like everyone out there is dangerous, when most are just citizens exercising their rights peacefully. That's what makes questions like his so frustrating. They take a real, complex issue about accountability and turn it into a quick soundbite about law and order. And sure, that might sound tough on TV, but it doesn't solve anything. At the end of the day, people just want fairness. They want to speak their mind without being treated like they're the problem. And honestly, that shouldn't be controversial. That should just be common sense.
ask a question, just real quick? Do you guys think that there's a difference between dissent and protest and violence?
Of course,
Yes.
but what's
So
happening
can
in
I ask you-
Portland
so can I
is
ask you-
violent. It
so
is
can I ask you a
absolutely
question?
violent.
So can I ask you a question? Would you guys be in favor of, say, pardoning people who were engaged in violent protests and broke windows and stormed into things and beat up police officers? What would you think about a
Threaten
leader that would do?
lawmakers.
What would you think about like want to hang the vice president? What would you think about a president that did
No,
something like that?
I didn't agree with pardoning people who committed violent actions.
Okay, so then what I'm saying is there you have it. What you have here is a clear blueprint of what we're talking about. You have a double standard in the way that this is looked. On the one hand, you have violent people that attack the seat of power in the United States of America. And not only are they pardoned, they are celebrated.
But they did
are celebrated.
They did go to jail,
And
though.
then they are celebrated
They did go to
by
jail.
your side when you guys get power.
They did go to jail.
And now we are getting a full-throated lecture on violence and protest when ICE is breaking into
Well,
people's
I mean, I would counter that. You can't even pull up January 6th because we can just go about 6 months before that with the Black Lives Matter riots
Where were
and
the
how many
parties at?
people were not
Where were the
arrested
parties
at?
for
Where were
their
the parties
crimes.
at?
Where were the
Where were the
protests
arrests
at?
at?
Where
Where were
were
the
the
arrests?
parties
Virtually
at?
nobody got arrested.
Where
That is
were
so
the
Where were the arrests?
Guys, let's not do the hyperbole thing,
Yeah.
okay? Hundreds of people were arrested in the Black Lives Matter
That
protests.
wasn't nearly enough.
Many of them were prosecuted federally.
Billions in damage.
Many.
Billions
Hold on a second.
in
David
billions.
Dorn,
Many
murder.
of them were prosecuted federally. Many of them served time for those offenses. So that actually happened. Let's not be hyperbolic about it. Caroline Leavitt also saying that in addition to, I guess, bringing in the troops to Portland, they're going to use the federal government to pull money from the city. Listen to this.
I just spoke with the president about this, and he has directed his team here at the White House to begin reviewing aid that can potentially be cut in Portland. We will not fund states that allow anarchy. There will also be an additional surge of federal resources to Portland immediately, including enhanced CBP and ICE resources. Law and order will prevail, and President Trump will make sure of it.
You know, one of the
Little
interesting
Miss Piggy.
things about this is the use of ICE and CBP as the vehicle for their desire to crack down on Democratic-led cities. Now, I mean, obviously there's ICE enforcement that has to happen in the country, but you can hear her saying there that, in her view, the failure to deal with protests outside of a federal building means that they're going to send in more immigration enforcement agents. It just feels like this has just become a way for the administration to use immigration agents as their personal police force, a federal police force, which, by the way, is not the way that they're supposed to be used.
Well, they are federal law enforcement, and to the extent that you have illegal immigration activity or attacks on ICE facilities in a city, the federal government has to enforce the law and defend their property. This didn't start in Portland a few days ago. This has been going on and on and on for years. Why does a major American city get to exist in a state of anarchy, even if it's not the entire city, even if it's just a block, however big it is? Why does that get to be perpetuated? Why is that okay? Why are we accepting this decline in America?
I'm not understanding why all of a sudden this form of anarchy is so different from, say, high crime in, southern cities that are Republican states. That doesn't rise
with
to
Democrat mayors?
Maybe.
No, definitely.
Maybe. But I'm just saying, like, listen, we have a federalized system in this country where states get to run their own states. All of a sudden, that's not acceptable to you.
It's not acceptable for local officials to allow anarchy where federal buildings are under attack. And regarding southern cities, they've been in Memphis all week. And by the way, it's working. They've arrested hundreds of people, illegal guns, people with serious violence in their background. They've made immigration arrests. It's working in Chicago, over 1,000 arrests this week. They're not singling out Portland. They're going after any city with massive illegal immigration, local violence, and
Look,
bad people that need to be taken off the streets.
I think it is an interesting new moment for the country to have the federal government involved in state and local level law enforcement. And I'm just pointing out that this is where we are as a country, and that's a different place than where we were before.
I mean, it's a
Yeah, honestly, I agree with Abby on that last point. What she's basically saying is that it's getting dangerous how normal it's becoming for the federal government to step into local law enforcement. That's not how this country's supposed to work. Cities have their own systems, their own police, their own leadership. Once the feds start sending in ICE and CBP like they're a national police force, that balance of power starts to disappear, and that's not something we should just shrug off. Meanwhile, Scott's over here painting Portland like it's the end of civilization. Every time it's the same thing. Anarchy, lawlessness, decline in America. Come on, it's one city block of protests, not a war zone. But that's the trick. Use exaggerated language to make federal crackdowns sound like protection instead of overreach. And that's what Abby was really pointing out. This isn't about stopping chaos, it's about control. When you start sending immigration agents to handle protests, you're crossing a line. You're turning tools meant for border enforcement into instruments of political order. That's not law and order, that's just more control dressed up to look like safety. Scott also tries to compare this to high crime in southern cities, which makes no sense. One is local criminal activity, the other is people protesting the government. You can't lump those together and act like they're the same thing. And in my opinion, when you start treating dissent like a crime, you're not saving democracy, you're shrinking it. At the end of the day, protests aren't a sign of decline. They're a sign that people still care enough to speak up. The real decline starts when the government fears its citizens more than it listens to them. So what do you think about all this? Do you think this kind of federal involvement keeps people safe, or is it crossing the line? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious what you guys think. And hey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.